One component of this course is something that has become a bit of a theme in some of your games, which is seemingly equal endings, endings that certain players may just agree draws. A lot of players may just agree a draw without fighting it out, but you almost always like to play a game to its natural conclusion, especially if there's some semblance of possible victory for you. So we've included a few examples where you did exactly that. One of which was this game against Ruslan Ponomaryov, another Melody Amber game, this time from 2010.
Yeah, that is true. Well, you talk about equal endings. None were more equal than this. To be fair, so I guess we should start at this point. Obviously, there's not much to see here. We got ourselves 4 against 4. I think he may have offered to draw like at this point or a couple of months later or before. But I thought at the very least his e5 pawn is cut off a bit from the rest of his pawn chain. Which means that if anybody's very, very slightly better, it's gonna be me.
Right.
And it's also no harm in annoying your opponents by playing on longer.
Absolutely. This was a rapid game, we should note.
Yeah, longer than you should. So anyway, I start by going rook c4, trying to control the 4th rank. You can just go g3 if you want. If I try g5, preventing h4, and f4, you can go e6, and that's a draw by force. So g3 is very solid. Obviously, as people will sure know, this ending is a draw, even without the e pawn. It's just a psychological thing. I think for a lot of people that you obviously know that it's a draw without the e-pawn, but you don't want to keep up the e-pawn if you don't have to. Like, why make a draw from a position of weakness when you feel that the position is just a draw to begin with?
Yeah. It's like a point of principle for many people.
Yeah, I think so. So he went. So g3 would have been really easy. He went king g3 instead, which is also perfectly fine. Once again, g5 runs into e6, so I went e6 myself. And he went f4. And h6. So here he had his first little decision to make. If he does go h4, I'm gonna play g5. He probably has to take it twice. And I'm gonna play king g7. And I can understand that you're worried here with white that you're gonna lose e5 and g5. And then it's a different ball game. It's still defensible, but it becomes difficult. So he tries to avoid that by playing king f3. King g6, he will start attacking my pawn, rook c5. King e4, probably just doesn't want to allow rook c1 and then rook f1. But even here, I would go rook c1, try rook f1 later on. There's just very slight level of annoyance.
Yeah.
So he didn't really want to do that. So he goes king f3. Everything looks fine. g5 is met by g3. But I give a check. Now, clearly you don't want to go king e4, allowing rook g3. So the choices are really king f2 or king g4. And I cannot see what is wrong with king g4. It may look a bit dumb, but what's really the problem? h5 is always met by king h4. He's gonna go g3 next. There's nothing much I can do. But it probably just felt a bit funny to him, so he goes king f2. But now I got something. I go g5, and either he's gonna give up a pawn with g3, which he doesn't want to do, or the e5 pawn is gonna be isolated, and therefore a target. So the game is well within drawing range, but I got me thinking a little bit.
Yep.
So we continue. Nothing much is happening. Rook c5 can be met by rook e4, which is something I probably don't want to do. Let's say king g6, you can go g4, and that looks very, very solid. Once I start running around with the king, then he's gonna attack f7, so I don't think that's gonna be a problem. So I go king h5, king g6 back. Now he doesn't want rook g4 because of king f5, but he's got rook a5, king f5, he's got rook a7. Yeah, rook d3. Again, objectively I got nothing, so I'm just trying to confuse him.
Yeah.
And ask him whether or not he believes that rook d5 is a threat.
Yeah, the mere fact that he has to spend energy even thinking about that, whereas you can just play it.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, it's not. Rook b5, for instance, king d4, h4, and I'm the one who has to, or g4, maybe lose. Probably this is a draw. But you wouldn't want to do that. So maybe he was worried that if he goes king g2, then rook d5 is an issue. I can understand it, and what he does is he does h4. It's just about making him make these little decisions.
Yeah.
That this is not something you would find in endgame books. Like they don't do a lot on 4 against 4 on the same side. I'm pretty sure about that, but
not interesting.
So this is sort of relatively new territory, and although it should be a very simple draw, he has to make some decisions, which can be a bit difficult. So he goes h4, which is a bit of a committal move, since now he has 2 isolated pawns, while my pawns are still protecting each other. I start very slowly. I go rook d7, moving around a bit. Nothing much to be gained anytime soon here. We're just waiting. King e4. And now, once again, I'm making some little progress. If he goes rook c7, he might run into some problems with rook f5, and if h5, I'm in time to stop that one. So once again, he's induced to go h5. I go rook a8, and now it's all about thinking that that pawn is too far advanced, and I'm trying to corral it. King g3, king f5, king h4, rook a4, rook g4, rook f4, king g5, and finally this pawn is gonna fall. Rook c7, king g6, and rook h6. Now he has to play quite carefully. As we see in the game, king g4 is a step in the wrong direction, because the king does not belong on g4, as we will see. I guess the easiest way to make a draw was to play rook c7. Let's say rook h1. Just go king e4. Wait. Or king f4, for that matter. So what happens after he goes rook g8, which is, I guess, the decisive mistake. Rook g5 would lose in a funny way to king h6, and the rook is lost.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And now rook a8, rook f1, and white is lost, since the king is going to be cut off. Fortunately, I actually knew this. I'd played a game a few years earlier where I had this exact same construction as black. That game has started with 4 against 3, with an isolated e-pawn. So he basically had the same, but without the pawn on f2. And then we eventually exchanged a few pawns where at the end I cut off his king, exchanged the g pawn for the h pawn, and then just brought the king around.
And those last 2 lines you showed really demonstrate why the king is bad on the g file for white.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And now...
When he played that, were you recalling that game? Or was that game you just mentioned played after this?
No. The game I recalled was played before this. So I knew very well here that once his king is cut off from the pawn, it's an easy win. And as you can see in the game, it takes a lot of time, but...
That rook on f5 is just a beast.
Yeah. I will mention another line which I thought was a bit funny. Let's say if he goes for if he goes for rook a5, then I can go f6 later on. But what I wanted to mention is that there was also the option of here I'm going rook to d5. And let me just see what's the way I wanted to...
Do you play f6 here as well?
Yeah, I guess I can play f6 as well. I thought there was one sort of funny line where let's say white doesn't check on d6 here. I think white should give a check on d6. I think also I could probably just go into the pawn ending, but the line I wanted to show was if rook a5. I thought sort of the most instructive way was just to go back. And
yeah, basically trick him into this position where you're eventually going to play it.
Yeah,
f6.
So king g6 and then f6.
Okay.
Just to be absolutely sure that I won. I remember looking at that line during the game I had a few years before and having a good time. Okay, so he just gave up the pawn and then that's it.
Yeah.
Obviously with 2 connected passers, it's pretty quickly.
Yeah,
it's pretty easy.
Not one of those connected passer scenarios where the defensive side can hold.
No, absolutely not. So I think he just played on through inertia. So I would say the lesson here is that in this case, if you're on the weaker side, just concentrate early. And for instance here, take some time considering whether to play g3 or king g3, because once you get this position, to some extent it's already too late. Obviously the chances are you're gonna hold this position still 9 times out of 10 or even more. if you're a good endgame player. But now you've given yourself a real task. You've given your opponent hope, and you're in a position where it's not a theoretical draw, and you cannot force a draw. And the fact that you cannot force a draw is a real key. It means that your opponent is going to be able to press for a long time. And similarly, playing on the stronger side in these positions, I think it's of paramount importance that you don't allow your opponent to force a draw in such situations, because if you just move around, the chances are they're going to overthink it. You'll sort of wear them out, and you will get at least some chances.
Yep. Yeah. Great example of how those small concessions can add up, and the ability to keep fighting is, like you said, of paramount importance.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and we'll see at least another example or two like this coming up. So in continuing with the winning equal endgames or pressing in seemingly equal endgames theme, this is probably your best known example. World Championship 2013, where you beat Vichy Anand to take the World Championship, and this was Game 6 right after you won Game 5.
That is true. Always a pleasant situation to be in, having just won. So he was playing E4. I was playing the Berlin back then. And I remember before each black game, I was just so confident that he was not getting really getting anywhere against the Berlin. And I felt that if he was gonna play D3, then I would be fine. Like, I wouldn't even prepare for D3, to be honest. That was my somewhat superficial assessment back then. I just thought, if he's gonna play D3, look, I considered that I'm pretty good at chess, and he's not gonna beat me that way. That was my philosophy. So let's spend time on other things, like the actual Berlin ending or 1D4. So I think, the mindset has changed quite a bit. Like, people are very seriously analyzing 4D3 and castles followed by rook E1 these days. So it's definitely been a change there. But back then, I don't know, I had a bit of a cavalier attitude towards it. He goes C3, castles, and frankly, I just played rook E8 without... I can say these things now that it's
long after the fact.
Long after the fact that I just played rook E8 pretty quickly without really knowing too much about it. I just thought, yeah, he knows D6, so I'm gonna go rook E8. Why not? What's the worst that can happen, right? It's some kind of it's gonna be some kind of Giuco Piano like position, and what's the worst thing that could happen? And so he played this pretty quickly, which had me a little bit worried. And I think it's a sign of the times that I actually played bishop e6 here, and that I was not even a little bit worried about bishop takes e6. Like, the thought back then was, bishop e6, what are you talking about? You just go fe. In this case, obviously, rook e6, d4 would be pretty unpleasant, but you just go fe and whatever. What's the problem? And I remember some people were talking about the computer was showing b4 and a4 and white is better. And at the time, I didn't really take it seriously. I thought this couldn't be much, but now obviously, with everybody playing the Giuco Piano Italian stuff, then you would kill for such
all these queenside expansion positions.
You kill for these positions with white. It's just that we hadn't gotten quite that far in our positional understanding at this point. So the Italian wasn't really developed that much, or at least I didn't know. I just thought I always played bishop e6 in the Italian, and nobody ever took an e6. So I wasn't too worried. And so after what he did, knight d2 and knight b8 is kind of a nice maneuver. d4, knight d7. I actually had something pretty similar with white a couple of years ago against Mamedyarov. I couldn't get much there either, so it's just whenever he goes, or I go in this case, g5, besides knight g5, which I don't think really works, you can just go bishop g3. I used to love that for white, like always eyeing that f5 square, and eventually starting to push d4, and I would usually win my games in those lines, and yeah, so I really didn't want to do that, which is why I went knight b8 followed by knight d7.
Shades of the Breyer.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think this pretty much ensures that I'm not going to be in any major trouble. He goes h3 here, initiates some exchanges. Eventually, basically just admitting that you know what, I didn't have anything. Now I just want to exchange to make sure that I don't mess up and lose this game.
Yeah.
And I think queen g4 was his first slight misstep, because now I do take on e3, and now that all the minor pieces are gone, his dynamic potential on the f file is very, very limited. And so I think the only way to evaluate it is that after that, this exchange is going to be favorable for me, that it gives me a very, very slight advantage. Obviously, objectively speaking, it's a dead draw. The advantage is way too small, but I felt like after this I had something very small to play for. So I went queen e7, and this was sort of the point, like when you're in a mood like I was, a lot of pieces being exchanged and the game seemingly heading towards a draw, it's very tempting just to go queen e6, just to say, you know what, I'm not going to even bother looking for anything here.
Yeah. Not even try to keep
the
imbalance.
Like basically your mindset is that the position is equal, position is drawn, let's just force it to go home as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But I thought, even though I'd won the previous game and I wasn't necessarily too ambitious, I could just consolidate with a nice short draw here. I thought, let's try and bother him a little bit. So he went for this. d4, rook a1. I think he could just go d5 if he wanted here. I have plans of, I don't know, playing rook a8 at some point, exchanging those rooks. I cannot at the moment because he will have activity with queen d7. So I think that was pretty safe, but also what he does is pretty okay. I take on d4, forcing him to take with the rook. And here we go, just maneuvering until he flinches. I can understand. Clearly, I was not going to force the game anytime soon, and he would have to maneuver quite a bit more before the game would open up, and I obviously have more improving moves than he has, but nevertheless, this was not really necessary, since he does lose a pawn here. If he takes an e4 first, he's going to lose a pawn. But he had judged that this ending was a draw, which is not wrong. It's just I didn't think it was necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So I make this move f6. The point here, I think, was that I wanted to prevent the king from reaching e5.
Mm-hmm.
F6 and he goes h4. And here I go king f7, which was really, really dumb. If I wanted to try something, I had to go h5.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so now I remember one of the points of f6 is that I wanna do this. Protect the pawn from a slightly more active place. And so if he has to go rook d5, I go king f7. If rook c5, I can go rook b6, try king e6, d6. There are some slight chances for me to play. So he's already messed up a bit here. After king f7, he goes h5 quite instructively. And here there's just nothing. And that's what should have happened in the game.
And you were kicking yourself in the game.
Yeah, I was kicking myself. Like, why did I play? First of all, I played fairly quickly. Like, why didn't I take a little more time there? Just give him a little trouble. And so here we were both sort of going through the motions. Because it was clear that the position was a draw. It's just my pawns are way too bad to create any trouble, and we both had plenty of time on the clock, so it's just moving around. And here he goes for rook g8. I think he could, if he wanted, he could just go rook c8. If I go rook g4, I don't know, rook c6, just wait. Also rook b8, preparing b3. It's not bad. Although I'm sure he didn't want any possibility here of getting some GNF versus nothing. So I think that's why he didn't really like. Also, if he wants to trade, he can just go b3. But he didn't want to suffer. There is no doubt in my mind that he didn't want to suffer. He didn't want to make a difficult draw. He just thought there was an easy draw here, and he thought by this that he would induce king f8 and rook c8 comes. But now I have some activity, and as a matter of fact, he needs to play precisely in order to draw. Which is pretty amazing considering that the position was so drawn a few moves ago. Yeah.
And just visually, it doesn't look like black would be the one pushing here.
No, absolutely not. But the problem is that his pieces are so uncoordinated. And this f pawn is going to be so strong once I go h3. If you remove the c and b pawns, position is a straightforward draw.
I remember that.
There's nothing I can do. And so actually rook a4 is a decisive mistake. He needed to go b4 here, and he could just make it in the race. To be honest, I didn't see that at the time. I thought he might already be lost. And besides, why would I even look for salvation for him here? Like, there's nothing else I can do than try this. So, like, looking through the weeds for some draw here for him makes zero sense from a practical point of view. But it's just interesting that it takes one careless moment like rook g8 to c8, and suddenly,
for sure,
that's suddenly the price of a move is very high, and he could not adapt. He could not adapt at all. He played rook a5, f4 pretty quickly. I went for h3. c4. Yeah, once again you could see, remove these pawns from the board and that's it, it's a draw.
Yep.
But here, instead, it was a pretty straightforward win. Also should be noted that rook a1 would lose to rook e8, king g2, there's rook e1, or rook f1, there's king f3. And
those pawns get in the way of
once
white
again,
side
these
checks.
pawns are getting in the way, yeah. I think this position would probably be a draw still. Obviously, without these pawns, you would just start checking instead. But I think even rook a1 would be a draw, as a matter of fact. And yeah, I didn't really have too much to say about this game. I think it's all about, as you said, the one moment that I'm actually sort of proud of is 24 Queen E7. Because it's so easy to be complacent and go Queen E6 instead.
Yeah. You just won a game, you're +1 in the match, holding with black when a world championship match is usually good.
Yeah. And even in other tournaments as well, like, why go Queen E7? Like, there's, like, you want a 5% chance of winning the game, you're gonna work very hard to just grasping at straws. But I think there's a lot to be gained there. And there still is in tournaments. And this is not something that I'm not quite as good as I used to be. I'm not quite as good as grasping at every single straw as I used to be. Maybe I don't have the energy or something.
So you're pushing 30 now, you're getting older.
Yeah, I am. But I think this is the key moment. Like, a lot of pieces are being exchanged, and this is the moment where you could fix a draw, sort of with Queen E6. But when you go Queen E7, your opponent is certainly in a situation where the position is obviously so close to equal, but black is the only one who has something to play for because of this double pawn. And why not? Exactly, why not? If there's even a slight chance that you're gonna win, you should play. And a lot of people forget that. A lot of people don't want to do that. They don't play chess in order to take a very slight chance to win the game, which I understand. It's not everybody's cup of tea. I've always been of the opinion that rook and bishop against rook you should try. Even rook and knight against rook you should try a bit. Like, once in a while your opponent will blunder something. And unless it takes more energy from you than it takes from your opponents, then you should do it. It's obviously a more difficult question in a tournament when you're playing several opponents, when you're playing a new opponent the next day. If you are playing in a match like the World Championship match, I think it's pretty clear that your opponent is going to spend roughly the same energy as you are over the board, which makes staying at the board a no-brainer when you're trying to push.
Yeah, very well put.
And there are obviously some unwritten codes in chess about what you should do and what you shouldn't do. But I'm sorry to say that I neither know them nor particularly respect them. So, yeah,
totally.
If there's a norm that says you shouldn't play on with in very drawn positions, then I'm sorry, but that's a norm that I'm going to break and try and set a new norm.
No, I think that's the way it should be, and that's part of the Magnus touch. And we've seen that time and time again with your games. I remember distinctly as a spectator watching this, Queen E7, the moment you played this felt like a slight, not shift in the momentum, it was actually you taking the momentum, and it was Slay, this gradual pressure. And then when Anand found H5 later, it seemed like he had regained his composure a bit.
Yeah, for sure. H5. After that, I was mostly playing on through inertia, to be honest. Like,
you guys played the stage really fast.
Yeah, there was obviously nothing there. So.
And then it was a full collapse. I remember distinctly thinking that no way he was going to be able to adjust and find, a very difficult draw after he won the c4 pawn, but you were pushing the f pawn.
Yeah. No, that's the thing. You gotta, as a defender, you want to make sure that the price of a move is not high when you're defending these sort of positions. And when you gotten to this point, you gotten to the point where you have one move that draws, and that is although the evaluation is the same, that is a disaster.
Yeah.
That is an absolute disaster.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for taking us through probably your best known example of winning an equal or equal-ish endgame.
Yeah.